Hi, Henry. Are you here now?
Audible now. Can you hear me?
Before I refresh your network, but your network is
Hear
choppy.
me.
Henry, we can hear you, but your network is choppy. So maybe if you want to refresh your network first, just like refresh it.
Say, I'm more than happy to have done this with DSM. Don't really mind how it goes. Yeah, he's been able to carry me through and through. I'll start in. This is a top room debate, even if it's a grand final. So I think everybody understands how like prefer motions are handled, retrospect, and I don't think a lot of things can be insinuated. This is an open motion, free to characterization. But teams have a habit in finals to always characterize things and never explain why the things that have already been set up ought not to exist. So I think that comparative needs to be entirely made in this particular discussion. I think that should be important. The next thing on why we think this world is just going to look like where we just stop oil is that it is going to look a world where there is global consensus for countries mining, exploration.
Sorry, Henry.
And even if they are able to find small trade, simply means
Sorry, Henry. Sorry.
please.
Yeah, yeah, breaking back, to be honest. I hardly get what you are saying. I hear some words, but it breaks a lot. So it's kind of difficult for me to understand. So I don't know if you can try again to refresh the network, and then we see how it goes.
Okay.
Yeah, put your phone on airplane mode for like 20 to 30 seconds and then turn it back on, then that's fine. We see how that goes. Yeah, what do you want?
I think I missed it because yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's good. So just start afresh. So I just like reset your timer because you had only done 40 seconds anyway.
Okay. Cool. I'll start. If you have a POI, like I said, I'll pause and ask for them. Start now. Pano, this is very important. This is a prefer motion, prefer a world motion. It simply means we ought not to argue in like right? It doesn't mean that we ought to argue things the way individuals want. We ought to argue in retrospect. Means we need to have that comparative. Comparative is status quo. However, they can't debate it based on like this world status quo versus status quo. It ought to be status quo versus the world that we characterize to you, in which you just stop oil. Second thing is that on teams in finals have just said ought to be it to be, they just ought to be. I think teams ought to openly do that in that particular regard. The next thing here is just telling you what we think this world of just stopping oil looks like. It means open global consensus for countries to stop using oil. It simply means you stop oil trading. The second thing is that this means that you stop oil exploration. You stop carrying out exploration for most things on oil. The third thing here is that you to actively stop other things that generally entail associating with oil, trade, exploration, mining, almost of those things, even when you have just discovered oil as a state, think you openly to stop oil exploration. In our world, there are sanctions put on countries that openly stop and don't want to do this. It means we openly put a heft on you, a lot of sanctions on you at a point in time where you do. That means because the goal of this is to make sure that you stop oil. At a point in time, you object the consensus, we force you and coerce you into stopping oil entirely. Other point of framing. They can't argue that that governments that refuse to mine oil, that refuse to pursue this, openly just like know what's best for their people. Most governments always first fucking care about their foreign policy and how they get more returns and how they get more economic buy-in to embezzle more money. Force these governments to be able to stop oil in that particular regard. The next thing OP can't argue in this debate, right, is the aspect of disenfranchisement of oil because most countries are pursuing an oil economy. Two arguments here, two reasons why. Firstly, Saudi Arabia has started a skyline worth $1 trillion to be able to adjust to renewable energy, but they have the second largest oil reservoir in the world. It shows you, one, that states can be able to always give individuals ways and other motives in which they're able to work. The second is that you're able to create new avenues in which those individuals can be able to create those theories. Oil in of itself and oil mining can no longer be something, but these lecturers can always teach about how you can create alternative sources and make better use of things, how oil was studied, history of always seen all these things happen. I think most of these things can always be able to like disenfranchise. I think it's a preferred world where we make people also be able to have an easily way to create adjustment and like adaptability in that particular regard, to be able to adjust to the most conditions in that particular regard. The last thing to say here is that we already have capacity because it's a preferred world where you just stop oil. CAP can set this motion and then you guys come start arguing about capacity. Capacity of this for that to kind of adjust to just stop oil. It simply means then that if you guys are going to argue about capacity, then we don't have a debate, right? Then it means that people won't be able to switch anyways. It simply means that the debate already assumes that you have capacity in that best of climate. I think sorry,
Yes, Henry.
did I break? Because a call came to.
Yeah, it did, but didn't really affect anything. So you were just like on that idea of capacity, really. So I pause the time at 3:36, if you wanna.
Okay. 3, 2, 1. Teams can't
Wait,
because capacity in existence. And said this. Yes, please.
you were breaking a bit, but yeah,
Yes?
you can. Now it's fine. You were breaking a bit, but it's fine now.
Okay.
You can start.
3, 2, 1.
Okay, Henry.
Yeah. Sorry. Someone is constantly calling and like it distorts the network. I just want to confirm if I'm audible one last time.
Yeah, audible. Just text them and tell them to call after.
So it opens. If you're going to debate that capacity doesn't exist, then we wouldn't be having a debate to begin with, anyways, because countries can always feign that the fact that they don't have capacity and claim they don't have capacity all they want, so they be able to escape that level of accountability. Before I move on argumentation, is there POI?
I'm going to argue violence.
Run smart. I think if you're going to be able to violence, I think we are going to show you that violence in of itself against state climate is justified. Let's just start on that particular argument. The well-being and thriving of the entire existence of the world has been off the subjugation of flora and fauna. It has been subjugated for a very long time onto the well-being of what livelihood ought to exist. The existence of the entire human race has been existent on flora and fauna. As we speak now, constant perpetuation on flora and fauna, not necessarily by like the poor individuals in the Karamoja who are working to survive to get water, the elites who believe that capitalism ought to be the way they survive and ought to be the way that they subjugate the entirety of the society. With that, forcing states and also force just stopping oil is a move towards the reparations, not just on that environment, but on the reparations of individuals who have suffered because of capitalists and a lot of companies and multinational companies because of things that have failed to work. People have failed, people have spoken. Some states are still, even when people are suffering to the extent that people don't have what to eat and have to depend on other individuals who generally don't have to worsen their livelihood. On principle,
Closing POI.
justified to job and actions more evil, just on a lot of subjugation of society, but on the vast majority of individuals that have been able to suffer as a result of the constant perpetuation of people's own ideals and selfish gains. Where you just stop oil stops that narrative and actively fights evil. Even if Op argues that you're less likely going to get that, I think in our world, you prevent a constant perpetuation on individuals that are going to be able to like solve that issue in that particular regard. We argue from government that it is morally justified to fight even when it's pursuing of just stopping oil. Collins.
All right. So
It's
it
6 minutes.
says just
It's 6
yeah.
minutes.
Oh,
It's 6 minutes.
Time. So that now we think still necessarily it was the reparations and perpetuity of individuals, but it forces two things. States to be able to create adjustments to safer and more green energy to be affordable. But secondly, it forces individuals to realize the different perpetuity of most of these things. People cut down trees right now because states fail them and always embezzle that money. On our side of the house, you're able to constantly create a better society now, have only one choice, which is to create ability for green tech to be accessible and affordable all fronts. The tipping point that you must be able to create the things that open our world are better for individuals to be able to access to particular. If you do this analysis, at least buy this, that the fight for people's perpetuation and subjugation and people's suffering is openly needs to have as many alternatives as actions as pursued as instant as possible. I'll leave you with an analogy. If you have someone constantly being beaten by a gang of thieves and you have a gun, you ought to use gun immediately to stop that harm from going any further. If you have a cancer, cut it down so that it stops going further. Proud.
Thanks, PM. Reminder, everyone, please keep your time. And all teams, if you're on the opposition, please keep time as well. That way you don't ask POIs when it's protected time. I hate cutting people off, but please don't force me to. Keep time and just like an external timer as well. That's not hard to do. Just use a stopwatch or a debate keeper. Like those are easy things. Anyways, LO, when you're ready. We are clearly.
Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Peace John Kylie. I'm the LO for this finals. Shout out to Smart, my partner. This was a good round. And shout out to University of Illinois in debate community. We just won nationals yesterday. So yeah, I think this should be an extra icing on the cake. Anyways, so if you have a POI, I'm going to ask for a POI in my second or third minute. So please prepare your POI early because I wouldn't want to go deep into my speech before you. So don't unmute also. Don't unmute. I'm saying it again. If not, I would not take you. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's have it. Someone is unmuted. Ferguson, can you mute, please? Ferguson, can you mute? Okay. So I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. There are usually two strongest justifications people use for the just stop oil like clamor, which is is that, like what opening government says, like the extraction mining of it has caused things like environmental issues, but also things like exploitation issues. If we fix that on our side in a better, and we show you better alternatives, we are winning. But guys, I think like it's very intuitive to say, because opening government says, oh, people are suffering. I think it's more worse when you just stop oil, and then the people, especially in developing countries and poorer countries, are going to suffer more because you're literally crippling their economy. When their economy, most of these countries, the economy is like solely dependent on oil and stuff like that. Like people suffer more. I think like on a like comparative of harm, we still win on that. But let's go into what this debate is about. I think I love this motion because this is not a policy motion. This is a prefer motion. And I think that's where PM largely misses it, because they try to fiat in their speech that, oh, you don't need to prove capacity. But the motion does not give you fiat to say your word is going to be like going to have that ultimately feasibility. They're supposed to show us the interest of the actors within the motion, the stakeholders that's going to act in this particular way, and how their word is going to be feasible in the first place. They don't prove that, so they can't just assume it's going to happen, right? This is a debate. You have to actually prove things. So I think like if on the feasibility thing, right, I think it's very important to note that their word is one that has no incentives and political will for like this just stop oil, because this just stop oil is actually a movement, right? And there's a clamor to just stop oil, stop the extraction, the sale and stuff like that is going to happen. They needed to prove the efficacy of political will from governments that literally make billions and trillions of dollars from oil to want to ultimately just stop oil because a movement says so. We think like we don't think that they proved that, but also, right, we think that these people are never going to agree, because even though like obviously climate change is urgent and stuff like that, we think that another issue with their feasibility, that this is a very slow mechanism due to the fact that I've proven to you that there's no political will or capital incentive, because they are literally making a lot of money from it, meaning that this is a slow mechanism that is going to always be a back and forth. Let's stop oil, but government say no, we make a lot of money from oil. They never get any solvency on the environmental issues and climate change that they want to get on their side of the world, right? This looks like the United States having to withdraw from like the Paris climate change agreement because they did not agree to particular things within the agreement. I think they joined back when that was resolved. But it looks like things like never forming a consensus actually getting solvency within climate change, right? We think that it's important to have a consensus in dealing with climate change issues due to the fact that this is like a global world issue, and everybody needs to have a helping hand within solving this global issue. And then going to prove the better status quo, which is, oh, we are not stopping oil, but we think that we can make status quo better, which is things like gradually shifting and transmitting to green energy, but allowing countries to adapt, not just stopping oil like that, right? And things like sanctions and stuff like that for like countries that do not like adhere to these particular things. So it looks like, for example, the Paris Climate Agreement that has particular percentages of emissions that countries are allowed to emit, right? So it looks like so countries are able to like have a shock absorber and slowly transition to this at their own time. Not saying all countries should come together, kumbaya, let's stop oil. That's not particularly possible. It looks like things like carbon offsetting, right? When you emit particular emissions, you have to replenish back the environment, things like that. It also looks like sanctions and taxes when companies and corporations over emit and do like a bunch of environmental harm, which fucking sanction their ass and stuff like that. It's also, that's how like we get like status quo better, right? We think also it looks like even the whole thing about exploitation issues within like the mining sector, it looks like fixing the enforcement issues, right? Because like exploitation in the mining sector is not a problem of oil, right? There's exploitation in all sectors. If you can fix the exploitation issues and the lax laws and make it more enforceable, we think we are able to solve this on their side of the world. The reason why, because I can't place a burden on them to prove that they get incentives without placing the same burden on me to prove the incentives of my side to work. But the reason why our side works and they're going to be incentive for these people to actually take this action is three things. Because climate change is very urgent. So people are continually clamoring for them to take an action. So they have an incentive for them to listen and at least take this action. But it's also like a concession because they don't have to totally stop oil and cripple their economy, right? We think that is particularly important. Before I go on, to the economic impact? Is there a POI?
It's not this house rule. It is a this house prefer. My partner already established what the comparative should be. You can't debate for the best of both worlds. Defend status quo.
That's not the best of both worlds, DSM, right? You are the one that argues a this house will by assuming that you have visibility, right? Anyways, let me go into the debate, the more important things. I think on the stakeholder analysis, right, we think that it affects the economies of countries, especially developing countries, because these countries solely depend on oil. So there's no diversification within their economy. What this means is that when you stop extracting, it's meaning that you have a slowdown in industrialization, affecting like the vulnerable countries, things like Nigeria that are already suffering a recession. But it is even more terrible because these countries literally largely do not contribute so much to climate change emissions. The bigger countries like the United States, China does this, but they have the larger resources to be able to offset this stopped oil. So if they stop oil today, they are not going to be in trouble because they have alternatives and they have the capital to just revamp their economy, right? We think that when you affect African countries and these poorer countries, you increase economic inequality, and then also like we think our side wins because we protect the most vulnerable set of stakeholders within the debate. The last thing to talk about then is the movement, because Just Stop Oil is actually a movement, right? We think that it's not in the best interest of the movement to continue to clamor for this. Why? Because as a movement, you need funding, you need buying, you need political will, you need people to be able to vote for policies that are in your favor. We think the reason with this particular extremist movement is that people tag you as extremists, right? And obviously you don't get political will because you have an unpopular stance. You don't get buying from individuals because there are people, the government tells the individuals that these people are trying to cripple your economy. They are never able to be incentivized to support you. But also you incentivize the government to actually try to antagonize you, right? And paint you like an extremist group and run propaganda against you that's saying that, oh, you guys are terrorists that are trying to cripple the economies of countries, meaning that you don't get any solvency, you don't get any political change on your side of the world. They're never going to vote in your favor because you are not making any concession. Movements are about concessions to get right. You don't get that on their side of the world. We are proudly winning these debates by a large margin.
Thanks, LO. DPM, when you're ready.
Chair, I want to confirm I'm very, very audible.
Very clear.
All right, thank you very much. So let me just set up my timer and then I'll start my speech shortly. All right, cool. So for POIs, you don't have to unmute. I will definitely take one within my speech, or probably two, just to engage both benches. So shout out to my partner, Henry. I think you've really grown compared to the last time we spoke together. And I hope you keep growing and never stop growing. Debate starts in
DSM,
3.
sorry, DSM, sorry, before you start. I didn't get to your POI preference, please.
Okay, so I said I would take a pause within my speech because I have a timer on my phone. So you don't have to unmute. Yeah, and you also have to put in chat space because I'm not there. Is that clear?
Yeah, it's good. It's good. Yeah.
All right, cool. Yeah,
just before.
Sure.
So just before you start.
Hello.
Yeah. So, is your preference through the chat? Can they put on the chat?
No, I said I would take a pause within my speech to ask because I'm not looking at the chat. But I would definitely take it in my speech because I have my timer right before me.
Yeah, I get you. Yeah, I get you. But the rules allow teams to ask POI anytime in your speech. So the rules don't limit teams from asking POI just because you said you're gonna pause and ask them to ask you a POI. So in instances where they want to ask a POI, do you want them to unmute or put in the chat? So they can't wait for you to just like say, hey, you can ask a POI now.
Okay.
Anyone is
preferable.
Yeah, so whether you take it or not is up to you, but like teams should be allowed to ask POIs as long as the time is not protected.
It's fine. Any system, it's fine with me. So let's get this started already.
Easy.
So yeah, guys, please, you can just maybe unmute, but just don't disrespect me by unmuting anyhow. That's why I really like taking when I know I can take. But regardless, you guys can just shoot in chat space or probably just unmute. Chair, let's start my speech in 3, 2. Hold on. Yeah, so in 3, 2, let's go. The reason opening opposition is going to be losing this debate clearly is because they fail to pay attention to my partner's context on A, what preference motion directly looks like, but B, the comparative that exists in both sides of the house, and C, the inability for them to stick with defending the status quo. Let me start with the last one. When Peace said, oh, let's keep extracting oil while we use the proceeds from oil to go green. That in itself is exactly what we want in our side of the house. But on their side, they concede that continuous exploration of oil is inherently bad. For crying out loud, this tournament is themed around eco-preservation, which means they still want what we are defending for, but they don't show the mechanisms through which they are able to accelerate results on their side of the house and achieve that particular outcome. So if they want people going green, we give you the metrics as to how that can rapidly be facilitated. This is even me engaging their worst context, but because a preference motion assumes that both worlds exist with all of the intact of functionality, the only debate is why would any individual prefer to live in either world? They needed to have done the work better. The second thing this guy says is that, oh, a lot of people suffer because oil is so prosperous. Some countries will not be able to do whatever they have to do on their side of the house. 3 responses. The first, we don't think you naturally need exploration of oil before you can be responsible to your people. 2, because you think oil is most likely important for you as a government, that is why you deprioritize other alternatives that exist, because countries like Sweden, countries like Switzerland, these individuals don't have any sort of like oil reserve, but they are fucking what's it called, prosperous, not by engaging in the oil market within their particular spectrums. It means if nations can easily prioritize other alternatives as to means of sustainability, agriculture, and all those sort of things, green energy, it most likely means nation will definitely live fine. Comparative. They may not be, but what they most likely have is more than enough, at least sustainable to feed their people within those particular regards. We are fine with such a world. I take that pure right now.
No, it's not pure. Sorry. I posted time at 2:10. You just like 2 seconds, but I already stopped you. So just like you were concluding, the idea of like countries prioritizing alternatives. So maybe if you can go there, yeah, but it wasn't like that much. Just like 15 seconds.
Okay, cool. So just continue my time. It means if there are other alternatives through which countries can most likely prioritize, such as agriculture, green tech, and all that, that is fine. They can survive on those. Comparative. They may not necessarily be as rich as oil-rich country, but the resources that is available in our side of the house is more than enough to cater for their people. They don't need to be as much rich to sponsor other individuals to fight war, like what Peace is trying to like defend. We are fine with keeping our environment clean. But the second thing, the third thing, which is very, very important, I want you guys to listen to this debate carefully. The problem in their side of the house currently is that there is already a global consensus that the current atmosphere is bad for human living, like human existence. But what they do, and closing opposition have to engage this, what they do is that, one, they are waiting for political actors to act in line with the general consensus of international organizations and climate international communities that are fighting towards things like environmental protectionism. But notice, in that line of waiting for them to respond actively, they are also establishing things like carbon taxes for individuals that constantly damage the environment, which is what Peace constitute within our speech. That particular mechanism in itself is the reason why they can never go green, or B, even if they most likely have the ability to go green, the ability to facilitate that particular procedure so that everyone overnight goes green is most likely less. Why is this true? Because if capitalists can pay for their sin, there is no way in which you're able to discourage those bad acts that you don't like, those bad acts for which you sanction them. You can't necessarily discourage that. So they are fine with polluting the environment. All they just have to do is to pay some sort of sanction. We don't think that you can exchange value for human life and healthy living for things like money in government banks. That's bullshit. Let's go back to the debate. It's a preference debate. Why do we prefer a world where individuals that we just stop oil? Two reasons. The first, because of the in-depth harm that this has necessarily caused within every local community. Why is this most likely important? The first thing, governments have legitimacy, like governments have that level of responsibility with their people to protect them at all costs. It means if part of the cost on our side of the house is that we have slow progress in terms of like economic buoyancy, we are ready to live with such a world. Before I go further, POI from anything right now.
Okay, from closing, yeah, there's a part of the motion that says just stop, which means unlike opening opposition, we agree that your mechanism is going to be fast. How do you justify that mechanism? Is it based on urgency, or do you have any other means to justify that?
Beautiful engagement. There are two things here. The first, if urgency is most likely important, is because we all agree that the earth is most likely that the earth is being degrading very, very soon. So yeah, on that principle of urgency, it is best. But secondly, because if you don't act now, it means that the earth gets much more deplorable. So there is even much more incentive for us to stop right now. I mean, that's why you can just say just stop. But two, even if it is not necessarily on the principle of urgency, the inherent harm there is that on your side of the house, there is still an ability for you to most likely want to go green because you understand that you need to protect your people. Oil exploration is constantly killing the local produce of individuals, particularly what's it called, oil host communities in your side of the house. You can't protect these people by just sanctioning oil corporation. The only way you can protect them is to delete all those particular policies of repairing their harm by just telling them to stop extracting. In our side of the house, it is something that is better on our side. So it doesn't just have to be like urgency. It's about what should the principal obligation of government be when it comes to like upholding environmental laws that protect people at best. Even if we fail, why is it most likely important? But let me define what failure looks like on our side of the house. The first is that we are unable to like have that very big bag of money that what's called oil-rich countries have. Why is that good? Because nations always have the incentive to tailor their appetite to the peculiarity of available resources. So we don't have Murano, we don't have AMG cars. We can ride bicycle to get to our work. But the reason why that is better is because corporation will also be able to reorganize their policy to accommodate that particular change, and that is better. We preserve people's life better on our side of the house. In their side
in today's debate. The alternative piece gives you in her own argument is that we concede to the fact that green economy is very good and there's a necessity for us to be able to shift to green technology. The reason why we don't support their wall is that in a world where you have a complete overhaul of oil all at once, there's impending consequences that no one can run away from in today's debate. This is what DPM tells you. The first they say is that countries can survive without oil. They mention countries like Switzerland. I just want to point out that most of these countries still import oil. Most of these countries still have refineries that process oil. The difference is African states explore oil and they send it to these countries. But more importantly, every country that DPM mentions in his speech are rich countries that can survive based on other natural resources and international trade, even without directly engaging in oil exploration. Oil is particularly necessary for our survival as African state, and that is why we do not support a world where we just stop oil. But more importantly, they talk about why it is the obligation of government to be able to prioritize the survival of people. I'm going to analyze why oil is actually very important for the survival of day-to-day people within status quo, and government cannot just put an overhaul on oil in completely. But the next thing then they say is that in their world, they can have gradual transition. That is status quo. Status quo, people are currently advocating for transition into green economy. The reason why this is particularly important is that if they put a burden on us to support status quo, then we say in status quo, we are advocating for a gradual transition. What they needed to defend from their own side of the house was the idea or the phrase, and that's why it's on quote in the motion. Just stop. That complete overhaul is what we do not support in today's debate. Why is this then important as a matter of extension? The first is the global dependence of oil and the critical utilities it provides. Because everyone assumes in today's debate that we can just put an overhaul on oil and just move particularly to living green and using like eco-friendly materials. The question is if that is feasible, why is it not happening right now? The first is the fact that there's global reliance on oil. It's not just because we get a lot of money from oil or oil-rich countries make money from it. It's because certain critical aspects of human existence cannot survive without oil. The idea that you need to use chemicals and pharmaceutical materials or to be able to be produced by oil, it means that the reliance on some petrochemical products derived from oil are very existence for things like pharmaceutical existence or in things like chemical production that are very needful even in the transition of green energy that they talk about. So for example, lithium, you need to mine lithium from the ground and you need certain mineral resources that come from the exploration of oil to be able to make the lithium batteries that happens. What that means is in their world, best case, assuming we succeed, we eventually have a world where we have a complete overhaul of oil. There are certain basic utilities that people cannot thrive on in their world because this is particularly important. An example is so many global pharmaceutical companies that produces life-saving drugs and medical equipment that relies heavily on byproducts that comes from oil production. Things like Vaseline that people actually need for day-to-day existence. I have engaged their best case when we actually have an overhaul of oil, and I've showed you why oil is particularly important for the existence of this state in and of themselves. But more importantly, we think that if the debate is about having an overhaul on oil, many African nations and places like Latin America and Middle East depend heavily on oil exploration. But more importantly, it is a major source of their export, and their national income depends on it. Countries like Nigeria, Angola, Venezuela, and countries have a significant portion of their GDP based on oil, and most of their public spending and social services comes from oil production and exploration. The reason why this is particularly bad is that if you have a complete overhaul on oil and you go by their wall where there's no oil, the alternative is these countries would find it difficult to survive. But more importantly, DPM says they can thrive on agriculture. I think Nigeria has one of the vast natural resources. Still, agriculture has not beaten oil in terms of output. There's a utility that comes from that we don't think that they're able to co-op the house. But more importantly, in many oil revenue is particularly critical for things like state security. I'll take you later. Things like state security and political stability. If you have a complete overhaul on oil, don't think that those nations would completely just look at you and say, oh, there's no oil right now. We don't have anything to trade. And so we're going to be friendly with you. You're going to escalate certain regional crises that happen in status quo because they don't have the ability to be able to diversify their economy because it is the only source of income. There's going to be a major economic shocks that happen in status quo. We think that this is likely to escalate because people don't have the resources to be able to co-opt the impact of putting a complete overhaul on oil. But more importantly, we think that in most instances, what you do when you have oil-rich countries being destabilized, for example, you have increased refugee crises within the Middle East that have big oil reserves in their own places. When you have a complete overhaul of oil in status quo and you go by their wall, you're likely to escalate certain humanitarian crisis that was particularly important for the survival of these particular countries. We think that is particularly bad. I'll take you.
Okay, so before Nigeria discovered oil, they were thriving on agriculture. The colonial master came because they knew that these resources are important. Development is impossible.
Chair, oh my goodness. Chair said it's time.
Sorry,
okay, before Nigeria discovered oil, they were thriving on agriculture. There's been population growth since after Nigeria discovered oil. You cannot be able to fiat that because a country was thriving on agriculture, then suddenly now that oil is here, we can also do without oil. You need to prove why the increased population can still be accommodated by agriculture as a major source of revenue. That can't be an argument you take away in today's debate. But more importantly, if you go by their word and we have a complete overhaul of oil and we stop oil, it means that so many industries that rely completely on oil would have to take an overhaul. Let's assume we buy their wall and we say that all these factories and industries that depend heavily on oil stops. Here is why this is particularly bad. If it is a gamble and their wall of just stop oil does not succeed, and you have a lot of heightened economic imbalance, people are less likely to believe in the idea of going green or a transition into the green economy. The reason why this is particularly bad is that if there's any iota they did not succeed in their wall, the idea of gradual transition into green economy is largely going to fail at the end of the day. We prefer status quo. We prefer a world where nation states are having consensus and gradually moving into the acceptance of oil here.
Thanks, DLO. Just a reminder, please keep your time. Okay, it's your responsibility again to manage your time wisely. This marks the end of the opening. To open and closing, member of government when you're ready. Yeah, we can hear you.
I'm a bit unwell, guys, so I think if at any point I sound like I'm struggling, just understand I'm in a lot of pain.
Text.
But it's okay. I've seen your text. Shout out to everyone who's here to come and watch and watch me bring this trophy back home and add it to the accolades of many things. When the tournament started, I was slandered. I was called a WSDC team. Now we're in the finals, and I mean that's just life. Shout out to my partner Danaro. He's been learning very well, picking up quite well. So I'm proud of him. Shout out to the guys that keep us going and keep us, debating, the competitors, the Adikas, the Takuras, and everyone in this call. Don't worry, guys. One day it will be you in this final. You'll watch, then one day you clap, then one day we applaud you. I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, the existence of humanity's biggest threat came in form of black gold. The black gold that keeps the world moving is the same one that will destroy us. And I think there's a factor that people are trying to underplay in this debate. Everyone thinks that the main problem is the pollution, but the pollution is a bigger problem than whatever the hell they're trying to show you. I think we need to ask ourselves a couple of questions. When did oil start becoming a problem? I think when you realize that oil started becoming a problem when the Industrial Revolution began, you'll realize that at no point did anyone consider the ramifications. But notice as well, panel, the context of the world we live in makes it that oil existing within your state means that you're a threat, you're more likely going to die. And even if you have any ability to explore the oil itself, you're not likely to enjoy the full benefits. I think the existence of oil is the existence of slavery because you'll serve a master and this is the highest bidder for the oil that you own. Anyways, context. Notice that oil is a finite resource, that everyone wants this oil because they think that everything is circumnavigating around the existence of oil, the refinery, and most importantly, the distribution. Notice as well that even industries based themselves around the creation of oil, which then meant that everyone just thought of oil and maximizing oil as the only resource, which means that we will actually take out opposition. I think the existence of oil means that there's always been an existence of laxity to innovate. And I think the problem that comes around this is that people will always take things lightly. As long as you're getting the satisfaction of using your oil, driving your car, no one will care about what happens next. And I think that's a problem that occurs. I think secondly, partner, the biggest threat that occurs is the death of individuals. I don't think it's justified for us to say that we don't want to stop oil and we want to preserve humanity. It's antithetical for any team, especially to say that they want to preserve humanity, because notice how countries in the Middle East have been completely destabilized due to the existence of oil. This looks like children being slain, mothers being raped, people being shot in the day because everyone is trying to compete. Oil is such a finite resource, a resource that is willing to make Russia invade Ukraine to just capture the oil reserves that they have because of the finity of this ideal and the finity of this problem and the finity of this resource. I think the only and not stop oil. Notice that there's a growing, everyone, humanity go like on sooner. We are seeing this in flooding happening in countries that have been deserts, in countries that basically are turning into underwater islands, in towns like Jakarta being moved from in countries like Pakistan and countries like Pakistan moving their capital city from where it was to another point in place, and Indonesia being unable to maximize tourism due to flooding of roads. These are all examples of countries that have been death. But ideally, why do we beat everyone in this debate? One, we just bring one extension, one unique extension. We agree mostly the characterization of these people is solvency. I think stopping oil now means that we solve two things. One, the conflicts associated with oil, meaning those invasions that people are talking about, will no longer occur. It means then individuals will finally have some semblance of peace. Your value of the resource is not taken away because nobody else uses it. And I think there's a high likelihood that we even create the buy-in that Smart is talking about, because the looming threat of death is something that universally human beings would actively take seriously, and you'd prioritize your own survival. So sure, yeah, right now the US is not the one that's facing the climate change problems, but they do have wildfires. They're not the ones currently being invaded, but they're the ones actively using the oil. I think also secondly, it also gives a semblance of freedom and also solves the inequality that exists within society. You're no longer seen as an oil-rich country, then seen as a person who matters next. You're seen as an individual whose life is something that is worth preserving. And I think that's something that people are ignoring here. You see, the moment oil-rich countries become, again, oilless, no one will value the individuals. That's why you find that they diversify. So we think it's possible to diversify. We've seen this with Qatar, the 2022 World Cup, Saudi Arabia becoming the sports capital of the world. So I don't think life is unilateral the way they're putting it. All you need to do is actively try and find a different solution. Thirdly, and the biggest thing we're trying to solve here, other than inequality and conflict, is the preservation of life. So ideally, do we solve the life better as compared to our opening half? I think the one thing that we do different to everyone else is we prevent the conflict. By doing so, we save the lives now. And I think on margin, that's something that is tangible, that will give people buying and at least have some semblance of uh, moral obligation for individuals to work harder and then solve the later threat, which is the climate change related problems. We think that's something that they're unable to recognize. Secondly, the actors within this debate are more likely to actively try and find any other resource. We don't think a gradual shift is something that matters. We think gradual shift means that we postpone the death or we know it's coming. Secondly, the loss of jobs is something we're willing to bite the bullet and take and just be like, we'd rather lose the jobs. We'd rather take the loss of jobs as opposed to loss of lives, because at the end of the day, we destabilize. I'll take the point.
Okay, so what do you think happens in your world when you pursue green technology at a faster rate?
I think the pursuit of green technology, let's say our world at its worst, means that we now shift to lithium mining and things like those. I think the damage is less because lithium is not as popular as everything else. It's not in every country, which means then that the effects will be less. Look at an entire region that is completely unable to do things. Countries like Yemen are currently fighting proxy wars. I think this is far much better because the lithium reserves is something that ideally we can easily deal with. And I also think that the world won't necessarily stop. I think there are alternatives. People will find ways to travel. We have electric bikes, we have electric cars. All that's missing is an electric plane, but it's already in the works. We think people just need to be a bit more ambitious and ask yourself what they prioritize. Do you prioritize the lives of individuals that you are actively taking away in pursuit you want so badly, or do you prioritize the active pursuit of your own survival and the world at large? I think, Mace, you're smart enough to know that if you side with opposition, you're siding in the world where you're committing murder. I don't think Mace is a murderer. I think he's done enough for RPDA to know that murder is a capital offense, and the people murdering each other are the people pursuing the oil. We don't want that. We don't want
Time.
inequality.
Time. Thanks, member of Cal, member of Op, when you're ready.
All right. Am I audible, please?
Yes, clearly.
All right. I'm going to start my speech in 3. Okay. POI preference. Yeah. Just state your team name, like OOCO, and then you. I'm going to take you, or probably not take you, depending on the time. Start my speech in 3, 2, 1. From the POI, you already get my case, but I'm going to respond to Henry's intuition pump. If you see someone being beaten with a stick by a perpetrator, it's stupid to take away that stick and beat that person with a new stick, but at a faster rate. Our case is going to be very simple. But there are two things you must note first. One, that in the status quo, which is most likely what's going to happen in their world, developed societies have a hegemony over the know-how of green tech and over the resources of green tech and how to implement this. Two, in their world, there's going to be only one energy source, like not just one energy source per se, but there's going to be one energy spectrum of source, which is like green tech, which is going to be like wind power, solar panels, etc., etc. How does this harm the world? Because you're doing this at a much faster rate. It says just stop. It means that there's a huge demand of energy that you need to cater to. It means that all the energy needs that were catered to by oil, all the energy demand that was catered to by fossil fuel power is going to have to be contingent on green tech. What then happens? The response from CG is just lithium. There's no much damage. One, you need a lot more raw materials. It's not just lithium, for goodness sake. It's copper, it's lead, it's cobalt. To build good solar panels, not just solar panels, mind you, but one to meet up with that demand. It means then that you probably would have to go to all those countries that they're seeking to protect. The raping, the miners probably dying. All these particular harms are exacerbated on their side because of the fact that you do this at a much faster rate, because there is literally no energy source. It means that even in countries where private organizations from even in developing societies where foreign companies are coming in, foreign countries are coming and intruding, it will be standing up against this. There's advocacy groups standing up against this. All these harms by saying that, it is because of the fact that we need this. It's because of the fact that we need to get as much of these raw materials as possible to respond to this energy call, may not even have the incentive to fight back against some of these companies or against some of these countries as they do in our status quo, in our world, because of the fact that there is an incentive to do so. Here, you can easily justify the deaths that happen. You can easily justify the harms that come from consistent mining. Second harm, and this beats all their principles on their side, because you do this at a much faster rate, you need much more equipment for some of these materials, because you might say, it's just lithium, it's just copper, but you need to find new energy sources. Why? One, because it's going to be a race to who gets it most. I'll mechanize this later, but note that. But secondly, because of the fact that you need to cater for that particular need that has been created, that new huge demand, it means in our side, all the flora and fauna OG cares about, all the miners and all the people that CG cares about are further fucked and are further ruined, because you need to respond to this at a much faster rate. They cannot claim they will do this in such a way that is environmental friendly, because that would limit the effectiveness of their side, because you need to get as many raw materials as possible, because you're experimenting in some several instances, because of the fact that you're not 100% certain what will be the most effective. You need raw materials to test stuff, to try stuff out. It is harmful on their side. Thirdly, it continues on developed countries. It is also harmful to some developed states. Why? Because places like the US, you also need land, because the thing is, what happens here is this exploration of green tech at a faster rate. You need land to be able to store like some of this energy, like places. You need larger systems to meet in those places. You cut more trees, you fuck up more fauna and fuck up more flora. You actually worsen those particular those places at a much faster rate. I think that's actually what's up on our side. Onto the political sphere. We think the race to power and the mechanization of these arguments. I really thought Smart was going to say this here, but the truth is, there's a weaponization that happens here. Think about how Russia was trying to weaponize natural gas against the EU. What happens when in a world where developed states and Western societies have hegemony over one, the know-how of green tech, two, the implementation of green tech? What happens? On our side, the EU was able to mitigate that harm of Russia weaponizing natural gas against them by finding several alternative sources. Some have been fossil fuel, some may have been green. On their side, there's only one energy source, which means in our side, there is a new oil per se. So people, all these countries are going on a race to be the first person to get the most raw materials, to be able to control the most green tech, to be able to see how they can weaponize smaller countries, conditions to some of these countries, like, oh, I'll probably give you this green tech to stand by me, etc., etc. It looks like all this particular weaponization that happened, even when some companies found oil in places like Nigeria and places like places like Nigeria, where these companies came in and were able to like weaponize the people to make deals that weren't favorable to them. What happens here on our side is similar to what happened then. How? Because back then, we had the raw materials, we had the oil, but we didn't have the know-how to be able to mine it, get those things. So they could come in and give us terrible deals. And we had to accept because we had no choice, because we needed that energy source, because we needed that money at that time. All our way of making money from oil is gone. It means that in that particular world, you can justify more of these evils. They are more dependent on you. There's more weaponization of these particular new oil in quotes, OG.
So your case is on defending options. That is, you have varieties. In your side of the house, people still rely largely on oil. On our side of the house, we have just green tech energy. The fact that it is the only one means that we can maintain it, engage.
Not be reductionist. You have to argue, like that's why I asked you PY to help your case. Just stop means there has to be a quicker process to that. On our side, comparatively, we think it is it is bad and sad that the earth has been as bad as it is. But we think when you have only one energy source and you have to develop that energy source at a faster rate, you definitely have to concede, and government will have to concede to a compromise of mining some of these raw materials, some of these lands that you need to create space for erecting most of these particular places at a faster rate, that there are going to be consequences and there are going to be harms. What is our alternative? We think our alternative is simple because it works both in developing societies and developed world. We think why we prefer a slow, gradual change is not just because we want, like, we can't prove political cooperation, but at least we can prove mentality shift and narrative shift, because we think several people need time to understand how this green tech actually works. But secondly, they need incentives. Look at places like Florida, for instance. The reason they're driving Tesla cars and electric cars is not just because they care about the environment, because that's a conservative state, but because they have been made to look nice. They have been shown the benefits, the energy benefits, how it is much more better than these like other cars that exist. It means when we have that time, we can sensitize people, because even if you stop this in like Lagos or Kampala, the local villages will still frack oil. They'll still use some of these fossil fuels. What happens with our world with time is we can change the narrative slowly, invest more in green tech startups, invest more in some of these companies with more time, change the narrative of people slowly, and we're going to be able to get there. On their side, when you have just one energy source to respond to that huge demand that has been created, you have to do horrible things, as what has happened, as with what happened like when people found oil. I'm very, very proud to oppose.
Thank you, member of UP. Wait when you're ready.
Okay. I'm just setting my timer. I'll take POIs in the 4th minute. Please do not badger. And thank you. I'd like to give a shout out to Ted Iha for bringing me all the way to this point. I'd also like to give a special shout out to my cousin Nika. She's here. And finally, to Israel Smart, someone who had been hearing about for over time, and I finally get to meet him. It's an honor to actually go against a foe such as him. My case will start in 3 minutes. Just 1 minute, kindly. Is some network issue. Just a minute, I just fix the network issue.
Gav, we are still here. Rain, can you text?
Is my network clear? Can I be heard? Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible, but it doesn't network. Yeah, so it's quite convenient that both you and Ted disappear at the same time. But that's fine. You can start.
Starting in 3, 2, 1. Understand this, that this house prefers a world where we just stop oil. The OG has come in and given a case and has talked about basically how reparation to nature, destruction of flora and fauna, whatnot. Panel. We co-opt into whatever the OG has talked about in the analysis. However, we actually believe that we beat our OG by scope and depth, by talking about and by clearly underlining the aspect of urgency in this matter. Understand that we cannot, in our world, we are not in any way going to prioritize resources over life, no matter what. And we are willing to do whatever it takes to make sure that life, the sanctity of life, is actually obeyed and honored. Understand that existence of oil means slavery. They will never be free so long as oil is still there. Afghanistan will continuously and consistently have a lot of wars. Libya will always be war-torn, regardless of the fact that it has one of the largest oil reservoirs in the world, because it will always be a slavery to the highest bidder. America will always interfere with Libya's geopolitical arena and stance. Why? Because Libya has that oil. If we take that oil, if we make that oil not that much valuable in the face of the world, then we clearly see that Libya will have a change. Now, understand this. The only way to protect people is to stop the mining of oil. And nations have a tendency to curb their appetite to the need of its people. The opposition came in and tells us that if we remove oil, we're going to destabilize a certain economy. If we remove oil, was that the continuous workflow job, and the state has the monopoly of power and the monopoly of violence to effect change if it need be, in whatever capacity, however small, however big. So, panel, understand that the state can actually re-strategize its budget, re-strategize its economic stance and frameworks to actually come up with a replacement that, if not at par with what oil would have done while it's still in existence, then at least subpar or somewhere close, because we understand that, one, we are trying as much as possible to create solvency. Now, the world of the opposition fails to give out a solvency because the government is buying into foreign trade and foreign pressure on the need to stop oil and use green energy to save the people from climate change, which is the intrinsic need and goal of the country, is not being followed. Therefore, in the end, we see a continuous status quo where countries are still suffering while chasing for more or the highest bidder to continue investing in them, and still being affected negatively geopolitically by these huge actors or powerful actors. Understand this, panel. We give you a solvency in the aspect that, one, we stop invasion and destabilization of various nations. Two,
POI.
inequality is solved because you are not seen anymore as an oil-rich country, but a country with potential. Therefore, we are creating diversity. Why? Because we allow the venturing of new projects and new perspectives and activities that, one, can strengthen the economy, state, and the country's economy and state, and to improve the life of living, the cost of living for these people. My partner clearly said earlier on, we are willing to bite the bullet that indeed it's not going to be in an immediate job transfer or whatnot or success for these people. However, on the argument of necessity itself, on the logical justification of the importance of it, we as the closing government believe that the importance of saving lives and economies is much more better than the alternative of actually continuing to be perpetuated, to perpetuate suffering and exploitation based on the strongest bidder. Now, panel, understand this. They have talked about the fact that we can weaponize this, and if it happens, if we change into green technology, that it can still be weaponized. Panel, understand that sanctions are always given. Sanctions will always be there. There are various frameworks that are going to be there. And the fact that this is green technology, which means that its availability is actually much more better and much more perverse to a lot of people. This means that even if weaponization was to happen at the worst case scenario, we are having formidable stances of various countries and various regions, unlike what was before, where we had a monopolistic view of various places only having the strength
POI.
and various places being weaker. Therefore, aggression and oppression happens. I'll take your POI.
Okay, all the sanctions will not happen because it's easier to justify on our world that this is the only energy source we have. Like, we need a lot of these raw materials to build that. So it's easy to justify some of the harms that might ensue because of that. Engage.
Understand that whether or not sanctions do exist, the fact is that one, at their best case scenario, climate change still happens. At their worst case scenario, climate change still happens. Why? Because oil is still existing. And that is a problem in itself. And not forgetting the fact that the oil existence in itself means slavery still continues. There will be a certain kid in Afghanistan who is going to lose their parent or their mother or their father because apparently there has been some geopolitical interference into that country. Why? Because oil exists. Understand that, panel. We are trying to tell you that the sanctity of life, the essence of existence itself, should be honored. And we are trying to point out that the most vulnerable actors in this motion are the most important, and that is the people themselves. Understand, panel, that the failed to give a concession that green economy is actually a good thing. If they cannot accept that the green economy and green technology itself can actually be of benefit, then there is no way they're going to win this motion. And them conceding to this means them accepting that oil should not be in existence. We should stop using oil. Understand this, panel, and let's look at this from this point of view. If oil exists, there's perpetuation of suffering. And if oil exists, individuals will always continue dying every single day. If not one individual, then thousands of individuals will still continue dying. Panel, understand that we give you a case on better sustainability. Why? We're telling you that if oil is stopped, one, death is stopped. Climate change is fixed, and finally, economies are actually boosted and development is carried on. I've never been prouder to actually support a motion, and with that, I rest my case. Thank you.
Thanks, Gavip. Up with when you're ready. Yeah, clearly.
Sorry, Hassana, can you hear me? Hassana, yeah, can you hear me? And before you speak, could you please check your WhatsApp DM?
Okay, sure.
Michael, can you also mute yourself as well?
Okay, cool. Can you hear me?
Yes, but before you start, wait. Gavip, can you mute yourself? Michael Daniel. Okay, great. All people can start now.
Okay, sure. All right. I'm going to start in Okay. I have to do this. So before I start, I'm going to be dedicating this speech to my partner Collins, and he was the best speaker in the just concluded ANUDC 2024, and also a finalist. Yeah. So thank you for running this alongside with me, and also I'm dedicating this to the University of Illinois Debate Society. Yeah. Okay, sure. Let's go. Firstly, I think it's like quite clear the reason why we beat opening opposition within today's debate, because OO's framework and the context they give within today's debate is to say, that this particular their whole argument is something that that was contingent on the workability of this particular policy, right? It means then that within their world, there's a bit, and that's the reason why open government could run away with a lot of things, right? Because they engage on that particular aspect. What you get from my partner was that we gave you how that weaponization existed and why it was problematic for not just developing states like us to clamor for, but for also developed countries in and of itself. So in most instances, there is a wide impact that exists within both worlds, and we were able to engage that. But then CG responds to this particular idea and says, oh, but sanctions will exist so countries don't response to give to our case. But let's go ahead. What did Collins inherently tell you within today's debate? Collins tells you a couple of things, right? He tells you on the weaponization of what was going to happen, because just stop oil means that you were inherently going to like move at a very fast rate. It means that economies don't inherently have the capacity to move at that faster rate, because in most instances you're going to disrupt a lot of individuals, like a lot of individuals like ability to interact within the economic sector within society. So in most instances, you're uprooting the basic structures that exist within society as a result of this. But it means, because Collins tells you also that it means you have to be able to cater for that abrupt like pull out from oil to green tech, right? Which is something that inherently can't work necessarily, right? Because it's a gradual change. So the alternative we gave you is to do things like, say, slow gradual change, and also things like sensitization. Because the problem isn't that people aren't aware of climate issues or people don't want to buy into green tech. The problem is that there has to be an incentive for people to want to opt into green tech, but also there has to be things like some level of accessibility to these particular individuals. It means then that what our world does on a comparative level is that people then gradually support things like government policies that exist on how green tech works, but also they have an incentive to want to engage in the like green tech products inherently, and also do things like, say, subsidies can happen for these kinds of companies that exist within like society. Let's go into opening government and tell you why inherently we beat them. Opening government says a couple of things that are inherently problematic within today's debate. Firstly, they tell you about, say, that there is a capacity to switch, right? But more importantly, there is an in-depth harm that exists within local communities, and that government has an obligation to do so. But they then run a principle on things like urgency. We think that shouldn't sufficiently be a justification to why you're just going to stop oil inherently. Because the idea is this, that society made a transformation in terms of evolution, right? So most countries evolved, right? We did things like move away from using things like, say, local means of power supply systems to things like fossil fuel inherently. There was a need for that particular transition because humanity needed to evolve for the productivity of humans inherently within society. But second, we can't just assume. Is there a problem?
POI to POI.
Damn, sorry. I'll take you later, please. Yeah. So secondly, right, you can't just assume that every country has a diverse economy inherently, like, say, the United States or China. Like, the comparative then is that there is a less shock absorber that exists within their own world. So in most instances, if you do that kind of abrupt shift to green tech, it means most countries don't have that shock absorber or a kind of diverse economy for them to create or for them to limit the impact of all the harms that is going to exist within government's world. The fact is, when they say, let's cater for things like, say, local communities, the fact is, right, is that SMEs can't actively survive within the market system that is going to exist within their own world. So in most instances, things like green energy products is something that is expensive. So most instances, these are individuals who don't have an incentive to want to engage within the market system that is going to exist, because you then have that kind of, like, you uproot them from the basic structures that exist and how they are able to interact with the market system. The key impact then, if your case is to say, because you want to solve the problem of pollution, then let's particularly just stop oil, it means it becomes detrimental, right? Because you send that anti-narrative and you uproot individuals' lives. So it then means that people are going to be anti-climate change, anti-against climate change advocacy, because they don't see a necessity for you to just inherently abrupt them from their social status within society, but you make these individuals pursue a much more form of like toxic alternative that is going to exist and do things like uproot or cause a level of violence that adds to the adds to the pollution or what have you, climate change pollution that is going to exist. Yes, and please stop badgering my speech. I'm going to take you if I want to, like, seriously. But then let's engage. They say, oh, that government obligation exists. The comparative is this in terms of government obligation. Where do you best get that? Within the terms of obligation, what you do within their word is that you deny individual that means of livelihood and you push them to react in a way that is detrimental to climate change advocacy. So principally, it is illegitimate for their words to exist because you push individuals to a word of extremism and a word of, say, like, more alternative. But then what does Colin tells you inherently within this particular debate? Colin tells you that one, there is a necessity. Yes, and keep your blue eye for the love of God.
Beautiful. All of your comparative is on gradual progress. We don't want that because you rely on sanctions. Sanction is the reason companies will never go green. On our side of the house, we don't give them that option. We win still.
Dominic, it's 6:20 already.
Look, panel. What we get from our case is that there's just one source of green tech like one source of power supply that is going to exist. So green tech means that you have things like more raw materials being mining. You have things like more mining of raw materials, things like intrusion of certain communities that you are going to invade. It means that directly impacts on that, like on countries' ability to do things like maintain or self-preserve their raw materials for the benefit of that particular country. We think that is something that is inherently problematic because you then exploit these particular individuals to some level or some degree of harm that is going to exist within opposition's world. But the reason why we beat closing opposition is because closing opposition brings this idea and say, oh, the reason why we don't want this is because things like, say, slavery is going to exist. I don't see how that has a logical link to the debate, because if you say oil is problematic, we tell you that the existence of oil in certain countries was the reason why people gained a lot of employment factories that existed. So in most instances where governments weren't able to cater for the obligation of the social contracts that exist within individuals and like society, these particular individuals and oil factories created and like yeah.
Thank you, Opwe, and thanks to everyone to what was a great final. All the best, and we will announce the results during the closing ceremony. Judges, we can join deliberation room. Everyone, see you guys around soon.
Thank you.